India is finally building the one thing it needed to become a superpower. Ask any historian what separates a great power from a strong regional player, and they will give you one surprising answer. It is not the size of an army. It is not even nuclear weapons. It is the ability to control the open ocean far from your own shores without asking anyone else for permission. This is called a blue water navy. And for most of modern history, only a tiny handful of nations on Earth have ever truly possessed one. The United States has it. Britain built an empire on it. Russia has pieces of it. China is racing to build it right now, faster than almost anyone expected. But India, despite having one of the largest armies on the planet, spent decades unable to truly project power across the seas that surround it. This was not a small weakness hiding in the background. 70% of the world's trade moves by sea, and a huge share of it passes directly through waters that touch India's coastline. A nation that cannot control its own surrounding ocean is a nation whose economy, whose energy supply, and whose security can be quietly threatened by anyone with a stronger fleet. For years, India's navy was respected, but it was not feared, and everyone in the region knew the difference. Ships were aging, submarines were often borrowed or bought secondhand. The dream of building a true, independent naval power always seemed a generation away, forever promised, forever delayed. But something has changed, and it has changed faster than almost anyone predicted. Quietly, piece by piece, India has begun building the one thing that could finally lift it from a strong regional player into a true global superpower. Stay till the end, because the final piece of this story is something even naval experts did not expect to see so soon. To understand how big this shift really is, we need to go back and understand exactly what was missing. A true naval superpower needs three things, and for most of India's history, lacked all three. It needs the ability to build its own aircraft carriers, giant floating air bases that can strike anywhere on Earth without needing permission to land on foreign soil. It needs the ability to build its own nuclear-powered submarines, silent underwater weapons that can stay hidden for months and strike without warning. And it needs the ability to build all of this without depending on another country for the most critical parts. For decades, India had none of this in any real independent sense. India's early aircraft carriers were bought second-hand from other nations, old British and Russian ships that were refitted and given a second life, but never truly India's own creation. Its submarine fleet was small, aging, and mostly imported, a patchwork of foreign designs that India could operate but never fully control or upgrade on its own terms. When tensions rose in the region and rival navies grew larger and more advanced with each passing year, India's gap became impossible to ignore. This was the moment defense planners in New Delhi were forced to face an uncomfortable truth. A nation that dreamed of superpower status could not keep borrowing its way onto the ocean forever.
This could not continue, and everyone in India's naval command understood exactly what was at stake. But the real story goes even deeper than a simple shortage of ships. Building a modern aircraft carrier is considered one of the most complex engineering projects a nation can attempt, involving millions of individual parts, some of the most advanced metallurgy on Earth, and years of precise, dangerous construction. Building a nuclear submarine is even harder, requiring a nation to master miniaturized nuclear reactors, small enough to fit inside a submarine hull, yet powerful enough to keep it running silently under the ocean for months without surfacing. Only a handful of countries have ever fully mastered both, and each one guards that knowledge as fiercely as any nuclear secret. India tried in small steps for decades, facing setback after setback, delay after delay, criticism after criticism. Foreign analysts quietly said India would always remain a coastal power, capable of defending its shores, but never truly ruling the open sea. For years, that criticism looked painfully accurate, But what nobody expected was that India was about to change its entire approach, and this shift would finally fix the biggest weakness sitting at the heart of its military ambitions. The first big move came with a ship that many people outside India barely noticed at first, but naval experts around the world watched extremely closely. In 2022, India commissioned its first fully indigenous aircraft carrier, a ship called INS Vikrant, designed, built, and assembled almost entirely on Indian soil. This was not a refitted foreign ship wearing a new coat of paint. This carrier was built from the keel up inside an Indian shipyard, using steel developed by Indian metallurgists specifically for this purpose, because no foreign supplier would sell India the exact grade it needed. Thousands of Indian engineers, many of whom had never worked on a project this large in their entire careers, learned an entirely new discipline from scratch, one mistake and one correction at a time. This achievement placed India in an extremely small club of nations alongside the United States, Russia, Britain, France, and China as countries capable of designing and building their own aircraft carriers. Skeptics said one carrier proved little, that India still lacked the deeper industrial base needed to keep building more. But engineers who had just spent over a decade solving problems nobody had solved in India before were not finished. This was only the beginning of what came next. Right alongside the carrier program, India made a second, equally ambitious move, one aimed directly at the deepest and most dangerous part of naval warfare. India began expanding its program to build nuclear-powered submarines almost entirely with domestic technology, moving beyond the small number of vessels it had leased or built with heavy foreign assistance in earlier decades. This was an extraordinarily difficult path because nuclear propulsion for submarines sits among the most closely guarded military technologies on the planet, technology that even close allies rarely share with one another. India had to develop its own miniaturized nuclear reactors, small enough to fit inside a submarine hull, yet powerful enough to keep it running silently under the ocean for months without surfacing. Indian scientists worked for years inside secure facilities, solving problems in near total secrecy, with almost no outside help and almost no room for public failure.
Slowly, a new class of Indian-built nuclear submarines began taking shape. Vessels that could patrol the ocean for extended periods, hidden from enemy detection, ready to respond within minutes rather than days. This mattered enormously because unlike surface ships, submarines are extremely difficult to track, making them one of the most powerful deterrents a nation can possess. A country with its own nuclear submarine fleet does not need permission from anyone to defend its interests far from its own shores. This changed everything about how the region's other major powers had to think about India's navy. At the same time, India made a third move that surprised many observers, focusing not just on ships and submarines, but on the entire industrial ecosystem needed to keep building them for decades to come. For years, even when India managed to design a warship, it often had to import critical components, from engines to radar systems to weapons, leaving the country dependent on foreign suppliers even for its own creations. This time, India launched a sweeping effort to build these components domestically, investing heavily in shipyards, steel plants, and specialized defense manufacturing companies across the country. New private shipyards were encouraged to compete alongside government-run facilities, bringing fresh investment, faster timelines, and modern management practices into an industry that had long moved at a frustratingly slow pace. Contracts were structured specifically to reward companies that sourced parts from within India, rather than simply assembling foreign components under an Indian flag. Slowly, an entire domestic supply chain began forming, from the steel mills producing specialized warship-grade metal to the electronics companies building sonar and radar systems once bought exclusively from abroad. This quiet, unglamorous work became just as important as the ships themselves, because a nation that can only build one carrier with foreign help has not truly solved its problem, but a nation that can build carrier after carrier using its own supply chain has changed its destiny completely. But the true turning point, the one naval strategists discuss with real excitement, is what all of these efforts are now quietly building toward. India is not simply trying to build a bigger navy for its own sake. India is trying to build something far more significant, the complete and independent ability to design, build, arm, and maintain a modern blue water navy entirely within its own borders, without depending on any single foreign nation for the pieces that matter most. This is an extraordinarily difficult goal, one that even wealthy established naval powers took generations to achieve. It requires shipyards capable of building multiple large vessels at once. It requires a steady pipeline of engineers trained specifically in naval architecture and nuclear propulsion. And it requires political will strong enough to fund a project that will not show its full results for another 20 or 30 years. India is now building all of these foundations simultaneously, with a level of coordination and urgency that surprised even some of its own defense planners. A second and third indigenous aircraft carrier are already being planned, each one expected to be built faster and more efficiently than the last, using lessons learned from every mistake made along the way. New specialized naval engineering colleges have opened their doors. Private shipyards are competing fiercely for contracts, driving innovation at a pace the older, slower system never allowed. And the government has committed to funding this ambition over multiple decades, treating it not as a single project, but as a permanent national mission. This effort matters far beyond military strategy alone, and this is exactly why global powers are watching so closely. The waters surrounding India carry a staggering share of the world's oil, its container ships, and its critical trade routes, making this region one of the most important stretches of ocean on the entire planet. A nation that controls these waters holds enormous influence, not just over its neighbors, but over the flow of global commerce itself. For decades, other major powers assumed India would remain a coastal defender, useful for guarding its own beaches, but never a true force across the wider ocean. They watched India's early struggles with second-hand ships and delayed submarine programs, and quietly assumed this particular ambition would remain permanently out of reach. But India kept building anyway, learning from every setback instead of abandoning the dream when it seemed impossible. This is the same relentless spirit that once built India's own space program, back when the world confidently said India could never compete with wealthier, more established spacefaring nations. The same unshakable spirit that built India's own nuclear weapons program, back when powerful nations tried for years to isolate India and cut off its access to outside assistance. And now, that very same unstoppable spirit is being poured into steel hulls and silent submarines, into the very ships that will determine who truly controls the waters of the future. This story is still far from finished, and nobody inside India's defense establishment pretends the hardest work is already behind them. Building a complete, self-sufficient naval power will likely take another 2 or 3 decades, filled with setbacks, cost overruns, and difficult lessons still waiting to be learned the hard way. Some projects will succeed spectacularly, drawing global attention and respect, while others may quietly struggle, the same way early rocket launches and early nuclear tests once did, before India finally mastered them completely. But something fundamental has already shifted in a way that cannot easily be undone. India is no longer a nation that simply buys second-hand ships and hopes they last long enough. India is now a nation that designs its own carriers, builds its own submarines, and is slowly assembling the complete industrial base needed to keep doing this for generations to come. The nation that was once told it could never become a true naval power now has warships sailing under its own flag, built by its own engineers, powered by technology it once had no hope of ever mastering. And when the next generation of Indian-built carriers finally slides into the water, and the next class of Indian-built submarines finally slips silently beneath the waves, they will not simply be adding ships to a fleet.
They will be completing the final and most difficult piece of a puzzle India has been assembling for decades. The piece that finally allows a nation of 1.4 billion people to stand not as a country asking permission to matter on the world stage, but as a true, complete, and independent superpower, ruling not just its land, but the vast and open ocean beyond it. India is no longer waiting for the tide to turn in its favor. India is the one turning it.